Lishana Tova Betham. For the past 10 days, you and I have been reflecting on the past year, on all our deeds and misdeeds, on all our attempts to do things, and on all the intentions behind the attempts. And we've been asking ourselves, how did we do? Did we succeed in the ways we hoped we would? Did we fail despite our best intentions? Did we always try to bring good to the world and to do good for others? Were we quick to anger when we should have been level-headed? Were we judgmental when we should have been understanding? Were we annoyed when we should have been compassionate? Did we try hard enough to be our best selves? Were our intentions always good ones? Tonight in our service, we thrice uttered Kol Nidrei, all the vows. All the vows that we made this year, all the commitments made in earnestness and sincerity, how easily they fall away. All the promises we made to loved ones and friends, all the vows we made to ourselves and our neighbors, all the commitments we made to our community, our people, and our nation. The thread of it all falls from our grasp. We regret our failures, our missing of the mark, our poor judgment, our moral blindness. On these days of awe especially, our hearts are heavy with the pain of lost time, lost opportunity, lost relationships. We have so many regrets. I have so many regrets. Not just from this past year, but from the whole of my life. I regret things that I did or failed to do in my life. I regret that I didn't stand up to the boy who sexually harassed me for a whole summer when I was a teenager at camp. I regret that I wasted a year going to law school when it was so wrong for me. I regret letting so many friends slip away because I was too busy to keep in touch. I dated the wrong people. I suffered a failed marriage. I made choices as a parent that turned out to be the wrong ones, sometimes despite my best intentions and wisdom. Many times I loved poorly and let my love get lost in noise and pain. You have regrets too. Some of you suffer the fallout of failed marriages. I know that you're haunted by decisions that you made that marked your path to this reality. Others of you suffer sudden or traumatic illness. What are the health choices that you made or did not make in your years? Perhaps you wonder if you could have done something differently. Some of you suffer losses of employment or challenges to your visions of the future. Others suffer in ushering your children through a morass of mental illness with a bevy of choices littering your paths. Some of you suffer in parenting children with special needs and facing the day-to-day challenge of making a manageable, loving life with all its forks in the road. Others suffer from religious traditions that have failed you in your quest for meaning and fulfillment. Some of you have lost loved ones to the cavern of memory and think back on the words left unsaid. Others suffer the misery of social isolation and wonder what you did or failed to do that severed connection with family and friends. We aren't the only ones with regret. God tells Abraham in our Rosh Hashanah Torah reading to take his son, his only son, the one he loves, to take Isaac and sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. The narrative seems to reward Abraham with God's favor, but one cannot help think of the regret that Abraham must feel in how he treated his son. Certainly the rabbis make a compelling case that the event on the mountain ended any kind of loving connection between father and son. The rift is palpable in the sparse language of the text and its notable omissions. And Sarah dies shortly after, the rabbis say, of a broken heart. The pain of Abraham's regret touches our hearts. Suffering, pain, disappointment, regret. These days of atonement call us to look upon our regrets, to move inward and downward, into the deep as Jonah descends in the belly of the great fish. And there, we are met by the ghosts of our past, the what-ifs, the if-onlys. We go back in time trying to rewrite the past, and in doing so, we get lost in the litany. What if Eve had not eaten the forbidden fruit? If only we had installed an alarm system. What if Abraham had taken better care not only of his relationship with Isaac, but of his relationship with Ishmael? If only I hadn't yelled that day. What if there had been 10 righteous people in Sodom? If only he had paid attention to the signs and the calls for help. What if the Israelites had not built the golden calf? If only you had taken the other job. What if Moses had not struck the rock? If only we had invited that lonely man to Seder. Wise as we are, we know we cannot go back. But our hearts are slow to catch up with this wisdom. And when we dwell in regret as a series of if-onlys, as a fervent wish to change the past, we live our lives backwards. The what-ifs and if-onlys of regret live deep inside us. They blind us, startle us, paralyze us. They stand behind us, always looking over our shoulders. We think about what could have been if we had made different choices. And too often, we see no way out. We experience pain and guilt and embarrassment when we encounter regret, and so we run. We don't want to talk about it. And just as Jonah runs from God, we run from our missteps and our regrets and the story that they tell. In the midst of the storm, Jonah goes below deck and falls asleep. He shuts out the hard truth of his sin. But in our Torah portion for Yom Kippur, God tells us, "This day I call heaven and earth to witness regarding you. Life and death have I set before you, blessing and curse. Choose life that you and your children may live." Jonah chose a kind of mock death in sleeping, and another in his descent into the murky deep. What would it have meant for Jonah to have chosen life? What can it mean for us to choose life? I ask you, I ask myself, do we have to run from our regrets? How might we let our regrets make our lives different? How might our regrets deepen us? Regret is the distance between the present and the future we imagine could have emerged had we made different decisions. Imagining a worse possibility can give us perspective on our situations and even inspire gratitude, as we find in the classic tale of the man who complained to the rabbi of his tiny, noisy house. We can always imagine a situation where we would be yearning for the actually realized outcome. One version of that tale is entitled, "It Could Always Be Worse." We can at least see a positive byproduct of the way things turned out. Daniel Pink, in his book, The Power of Regret, calls this technique at leasting. At least I learned from the experience. At least I can do better next time. At least Jonah didn't drown when the sailors threw him overboard. At least Abraham could nurture children in his future. At least Isaac survived. At leasting isn't everything, but it can give us perspective. Pink further tells us that the indirect paths of if only and what if offer a faster route to meaning than the more direct route of pondering meaning itself. Likewise, when people consider counterfactual alternatives to life's events, that is, things turning out differently had they made different choices, they experience higher levels of religious feeling and a deeper sense of purpose. The way we confront our regret is based on the stories we tell ourselves. And this is key. Can we stop telling a story in which we don't simply dwell in our regret and all of its negative feelings? If we stop to tell the story of our regret differently, through a new lens, might we discern greater meaning? How could this work? First, remember we are Jews. For us, reframing brokenness is not a new project. We were slaves in Egypt, so we know the plight of the stranger. Our exile to Babylonia was a crucible for Jewish intellectual and spiritual creativity, which led us to a new way of worshiping God. The specter of the Spanish Inquisition forced new ways of practicing Judaism and passing Torah on to our children. In the wake of a litany of pogroms and massacres, exile and discrimination, we Jews transformed our identity of degradation to that of the Sabra's strength and 21st century Jewish creativity. our harrowing past has always helped us shape our values and actions. Reframing our regrets helps us see the larger context of our experiences and influences. And when we see the larger context, we no longer simply dwell in the past, feeling helpless, embarrassed, or ashamed. Rather, we build a future informed by our newly acquired wisdom. We not only imagine what we wish had been, but also leverage that regret. We write our next chapter in a more thoughtful and informed way. Then the force of the narrative shifts toward growth. In harnessing our regrets effectively to make for a different future, we are saved from our earlier folly. We can tell a story instead of redemption. How we frame and understand the regrets of the past, how we go about telling them in the scope of our lives as a whole, is in very many ways much in our control, no matter our circumstances. Thinker and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl writes, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." On Rosh Hashanah, our deeds are written in the book of life. On this day of Yom Kippur, they will be sealed. All our regrets, along with our deeds of kindness, all our misdeeds, and all our mitzvahs. We are authors of this book, and we are its protagonists. Before it is sealed, we can rewrite the story. Our Machzor reminds us that despite all the transgressions and poor judgment that fill our years, we can do teshuvah. We can pray. We can give tzedakah, all of which transform the meaning of the story. Yet the Machzor here is talking about God's forgiveness. What about our forgiveness of ourselves? Some things cannot be changed. I think of irreparable harm I have done to precious relationships, the opportunities I missed because I just didn't believe in myself, special moments I let pass by without cherishing them. And the story I often tell myself about these mistakes is how terrible it makes me. But this self-effacement is not what God wants. Over and over, the Machzor reminds us of the 13 attributes of God. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed Le'alafim, Nosei Avon V'Fesha, V'Chata'a V'Nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Much like our compassionate God does, we can approach our regrets with compassion too. We can extend kindness to ourselves. We can forgive. Think of how you would advise and understand a friend in your situation. Would you scold them saying, "Yes, it is all your fault"? Or would you help them see and understand the circumstances that played into their choices and challenges? you owe yourself at least as much rachamim, at least as much compassion as you would give another. I want to invite you now to do something a little bit unusual. If you'd like to close your eyes for this, it might help. I want you to think of yourself as a child now. Not think of the child you were, but think of yourself now and think of that person as a child. Close your eyes and imagine that person standing before you. That child is sad. That child is scared. Invite that child to sit on your lap and be comforted. Comforted in their embarrassment, their shame, their confusion, their regret. Hold them. Comfort them. Earlier in my remarks, I mentioned that one summer in my teens, a boy at my Jewish summer camp routinely harassed me. I regret that I didn't stand up to him. I regret that I didn't demand more of the camp staff. I felt awkward and embarrassed, powerless and ashamed. But over time, I was able to write a different story. I realized that I was more than a victim. I was a person with power and a voice. Today, this power and voice are integral parts of how I move through the world. They inform how I deal with the belittling and harassment I still experience as a woman in the world today. My power and voice inform how I raise my children. They inform how I run programs and learning experiences for adults and children alike. They inform how I comfort and how I counsel. That terrible summer became a wellspring of advocacy and leadership that I strive to exercise every day. I made that summer a source of wisdom. I rewrote the story. Confronting our past is hard, but instead of running from it, as Jonah first did, we could do what Jonah did when he got a second chance. We can choose life. In the end, Jonah heeded God's command and finally went to Nineveh. He preached, and the people repented. The story we tell on this day of awe is not only about Jonah's missteps, but also about his eventual success. Prophet though he may be, Jonah is human, like we are. He is flawed, doesn't always get it right, at least not the first time. But he uses the past to try again, making the next chapter in his story a better one. Let us, all of us, use our regrets and their hard-won wisdom to anchor ourselves as we move into the future. Let us build toward hope on our foundations of regret. We can make the new year a story of redemption, of ourselves, of one another, of the world. May the story we write be sealed as the tale of who we truly are, sealed for life. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will. Shana Tova.